Okay. Um, yes. Uh, so moral distress is you'll usually find in the literature that talks about it is that it really back in the 1980s it was defined by this researcher Andrew Jameton, saying that moral distress is typically occurs among healthcare, usually hospital nurses, who feel like that they're unable to act ethically um, due to decisions made by the institution. So an example of that, and I see this often, I have seen this in every hospital that I have worked in, the VA, Christian Hospital in North County, St. Louis University Hospital, Barnes Jewish. Um, so what might happen is that a patient might enter what's called medical futility. So every treatment that the medical team has offered, the the responses of the patient have gotten fewer and fewer and fewer, and so it's come to the point that it just seems like all of their treatment is going to be futile. And not only that, but it might actually harm the patient. It's not going to increase their quality of life. And there may be physicians who say, no, no, as long as there is life, as long as there is breath, we're going to continue. Um, and so that sometimes puts patients in puts nurses in a bind because the family will often um, speak to the nurse and say, what's going on? What's happening? And the the nurse might find him or herself very conflicted. Um, so Jameson talks about, so there is acute moral distress, so that actually takes place during the event itself. And then he talks about residue. So residue is what happens after the event has occurred, and it needs to be processed, talked over, talked about. There needs to be some kind of conclusion to it. Um, and Bridget Kelly said, in the 90s, talked about how it can be that moral distress, both in its an acute and in its residual stages, that it can be accompanied by all kinds of emotions: powerlessness, guilt, grief, um, and if it is prolonged, it could end up in depression. And an example of this might be that a physician did not order pain medication uh, for uh, for a patient who is in pain, and the family is just becomes very angry with the nurse. Why are you letting him suffer? Why are you keeping him in pain? And you know, the a nurse is not supposed to say, well, the doctor didn't uh, order any pain medication. Um, so the nurse might take on the brunt of that. Um, and so there can be a great deal of um, just sorry, I need to admit some people into our meeting. Yeah, so that could result in a lot of feelings that are just very difficult. A lot of guilt, and nurses definitely want to. I mean, they're there because they care for people, and to see families in pain can be devastating. So, moral distress is unfortunately um, it's a fairly common aspect of healthcare, um, and that there are steps to resolving it. Um, so so usually, at least the steps at St. Louis University Hospital are that nurses will talk to each other. They'll say, what, I'm in such a bind. I don't know what to do. What would you do? What do you think about this? And And there might be solutions that come about in that conversation amongst each other. And then, of course, there's um, going up the different levels, maybe talking to the nurse manager, saying, I'm not sure what to do about this. Here is this situation, this end-of-life situation that I feel very uncertain about, I feel conflicted about. Do you have any advice? Do you have any guidance? Is there anyone I can talk to? It might also be that that the nurse could talk with a chaplain. Um, and uh, and also, it may also be, and this happens often at SLU, is that if there is a situation that um, a nurse or a staff member, maybe a physician, so it's not just nurses who go through this, it's also physicians. If they feel like that it can't be resolved through some kind of conversation, uh, some kind of consultation, then what they might do is they might call for an ethics consult in which the members of the ethics committee of the hospital will come together, um, and they will talk about the issue at hand. And um, the people on an ethics committee they're trained in being able to have dialogue about these ethical issues, to listen carefully to them, to ask really important questions. And chaplains are usually part of these ethics consults, to also be able to bring the spiritual component into this. So it's really a team effort to listen carefully to an ethical issue, and that can reduce the incidence of moral distress significantly, both in its acute and in its residual stages. So this is kind of how things work generally. So um, unfortunately, things are quite different now that we are in this pandemic. So so just the sheer acuity and the suddenness of um, COVID-19, of the coronavirus, it has just thrown a wrench into all of that. So there is, it's created so much uncertainty in hospitals all around the country. So researchers are still trying to figure out what is this thing? How does it work? I mean, we get a sense of how it works, but it seems like every day a new understanding of how it affects the body, how it attacks the immune system, what parts of the body it attacks. So there's uncertainty about it. There's uncertainty about different treatments. You know, will this drug work? Will that drug work? You know, do we have to wear masks? Do we not have to wear masks? Um, Uncertainty about protective protocols. So you may see in this picture of this healthcare worker wearing a mask and goggles and gloves. What's missing is a face shield, which is what you'll typically find in healthcare workers who are going into the rooms of COVID-19 patients. So you may have also heard that because of the suddenness of this pandemic, the volume of protective equipment has been reduced. So just the availability of surgical masks and gloves and gowns and facial masks and all of that. So there's been a shortage of that in hospitals, and of course the public has consumed, bought many surgical masks and whatnot, and thankfully there was kind of a upswell of making your own cloth masks, you know, for the public. So the difficulty with having reduced access to this protective equipment is, so what does that mean? Who can I visit? Who can I not visit? When can I visit? um, am I putting myself at risk by going into the room of a COVID-19 patient with a surgical mask, which is what this healthcare worker is wearing, versus an N95 mask, which is much more effective at screening out very, very fine particulates and perhaps virus. On top of that, um, when this was first starting at SLU, um, the, um, the protocols for personal protective equipment were changing not just every day, but maybe 3, 4, 5 times a day. So I know with the chaplains, they were initially told, do not go on the floor with a mask. Don't wear a mask. Because you don't want to frighten people. You don't want to freak people out. You don't want to freak out family members or patients or fellow staff. And then it was, now you do have to wear a mask, but you can only wear a surgical mask. Going into a room, well, you can't go into a room. You can't go into any room to visit a patient. Well, then it was, well, you can go into a room, but you have to stay 6 feet away so you can offer patient care to non-COVID patients from the doorway. And then, as it currently stands now, you can visit non-COVID patients at the bedside wearing a surgical mask and gloves. Chaplains cannot visit COVID patients at all. So if they need pastoral care, then it's usually by telephone. So yeah, so all of these are different, difficult decisions that people have to make every day. So as you can imagine, that all of this creates a terrible acuity and moral distress, especially as frontline medical staff, nurses, physicians are having to make these terrible, difficult decisions about who gets care and who doesn't. If we have this limited supply of respirators, who gets a respirator and who doesn't get one? And what is the protocol for that? How do we decide who makes that decision? And then how do we notify the family? How do we notify a patient? We are, at SLU, we are very, very fortunate that we have many, many respirators. As it stands right now, that St. Louis University Hospital has fewer COVID-19 patients than other hospitals in the city like Barnes-Jewish and DePaul and St. Mary's. But the thing about moral distress in COVID-19 is that there's no break. So typically with moral distress, you have this ethical issue. You're able to talk it out with someone. You're able to maybe have an ethics consult. Just because of the sheer acuity of COVID-19, how fast it's come on, and how the mortality rate for COVID-19 is so much higher than other conditions, there simply is no time. There's no time to process it. It just keeps going on and on and on. So I want to share with you a clip that speaks to this reality. This is from, just a very short segment of Good Morning America, in which some healthcare professionals talk about their experience of acute moral distress and what that means.
As this pandemic spreads and hospitals get overwhelmed, we are hearing more harrowing stories from healthcare workers on the front lines about what they're facing. ABC's Trevor Alt, also working from home this morning, joins us with more on that. Trevor, good morning.
Well, Whit, good morning. You know, doctors and nurses are known for their ingenuity, but right now they're facing unprecedented pressure and a crush of patients. And so many of them keep telling us in order to tackle this pandemic, they're having to put themselves at risk.
As parts of the U.S. prepare for the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic this week, the country's medical workers are suiting up and going to work on the front lines.
I wear my own mask that I had purchased online, and that's just to save enough PPE for everyone else.
Those drastic steps necessary to fend off a virus that's proving to be deadly for healthcare workers. Detroit nurse Lisa Ewald had been caring for COVID-19 patients only to contract the virus herself. She died just days later. Her hospital releasing a statement saying, in part, as healthcare providers on the front lines of this pandemic, we know we are not immune to its traumatic effects. But with skyrocketing case numbers and an apparent shortage of supplies of essential equipment,
I quit my job today.
Some healthcare workers like Imaris Vera say the risk has grown too great.
This isn't going to get any better. America is not prepared, and nurses are not being protected.
Vera says she loves nursing and she's looking for jobs in telehealth, but she has to protect herself and vulnerable members of her family.
I'd rather be without pay for a couple weeks and have to look for another job than possibly lose my life or my family members.
Amy DeLine, an ER nurse at Sinai Grace in Michigan, sharing the heartbreaking reality healthcare workers are facing across the nation.
We're losing a lot of patients quickly, and as a nurse and as a doctor, usually you can give yourself a couple moments to regain composure, but now you don't even have the moment to do that, because as soon as there's one death, you've got somebody else in the process of crashing, and you're running from one bed to the next without any time to really absorb what has just gone on until the end of your shift.
This morning, hospital workers who know they're at risk are getting backup. These medical workers boarded a flight from Atlanta in late March. They're now volunteering their services in New York.
The risk is a part of nursing. New York is in a greater need, and at some point other states will have the same need of not having it right now.
Well, so far, 85,000 medical volunteers have stepped up to help here in New York, including more than 20,000 who have come in from out of state, like that last nurse we heard from, Larice Ransom. She left behind her family and her children in Birmingham, Alabama, to go where she felt she was needed most. Eva?
All right, Trevor Altforest, thank you so much. Well, hey.
So, as the clip that we saw just a moment ago, that one of the nurses who was speaking, the emergency department nurse, had said that there's just no opportunity to process after someone crashes or someone dies. It just keeps going on and on and on. And so prolonged exposure to this acute stage moral distress, it can result in all kinds of things: depression, chronic anxiety, disorientation, hypervigilance, frustration, guilt, powerlessness. And you can see over on the left-hand side of the screen that it got to the point that a doctor in New York City, who was at the front line of treating COVID-19 patients, took her own life. That this can be, this is an indication of the seriousness and depth of moral distress acuity, and that there are thousands of healthcare workers who are experiencing it right now, and that chaplains are not immune from moral distress. So none of the chaplains in my hospital, none of the chaplains in the SSM healthcare system are permitted to visit COVID-19 patients. So we have surgical masks that we can wear on the floors, but not N95s. And so we're forbidden from going into COVID-19 rooms. And so one of the things that chaplains do is we attend to people who are dying, and that with COVID-19 patients, we're not permitted to do that. and that families in many hospitals, I know at St. Louis University Hospital, no families can come into the hospital unless a non-COVID-19 patient is dying, and then there might be like compassionate exception for like 1 or 2 family members to be able to come into a non-COVID-19 room to be with a patient who is dying. And so the lack of ability for chaplains to interact on a regular basis with families is also extremely distressing. That we're not able to offer sacraments to COVID-19 patients. And also just the persistent exposure to the anxiety and the powerlessness of the frontline staff. It can be very, very difficult. So the thing is that chaplains are trained to really recognize the signs of acute moral distress in themselves and in each other and in frontline staff. So I think that's one of the values of CPE. You know, I'm a CPE educator, so I'm somewhat biased, but being able to recognize those signs of anxiety and those signs of depression, uncertainty, and so the major chaplaincy and pastoral care organizations like the Association of Professional Chaplains that I'm a member of, National Association of Catholic Chaplains, Jewish chaplains, that all of them are creating networks of support so that chaplains have some place to go where they can talk, where they can find resources to understand what's going on, how to better serve the staff, how to be a support to the staff at their hospitals, and then also chaplains within healthcare systems can offer each other support. So I and my director, Christina Stevenson, who is the director of the department, of the pastoral care department at SLU, who's also a CPE educator, twice a week, we hold an online session for SSM chaplains throughout the 4-state SSM system for any SSM chaplains who want to talk, who want to process, and you know, some of the stories that we hear are difficult, and that these chaplains need to go somewhere besides their hospital and besides home, just to be able to talk it out, just to be able to talk to people who understand what's going on. So, there's a lot of mutual support there. So what ends up happening is, from that base of mutual support, chaplains are then able to be a better resource for staff. So many healthcare staff are taught either formally or informally to kind of tough it out. So you're supposed to be able to manage your pain, manage your anxiety, and that chaplains can be an invitation to if you need to open up a little chink in the emotional armor, you can with me. And so I know at my hospital and many other hospitals that chaplains are making a concerted effort to check in with staff. How's everything going? How you doing? Especially after a COVID-19 death. Just to take a few seconds. How's everything going? And it may be that a staff member is not really able to process very much. I mean, it takes some time and energy to be able to process that stuff emotionally. And most staff members, when they're on the floor, they don't have that time. But just to be able to have someone recognize, man, that sounds like that was tough. Just to have someone acknowledge it. Many staff members say that that's very helpful. One of the things that we have done in our hospital, you can see on the right-hand side, there's a picture of one of the spirituality sessions or stations. So we set up one of these on each floor so that the staff, there's little candies in the dish there, and there's like little mints. There are electric candles there, and there's a potted plant, and just some thoughts and prayers that are written, and it's just a reminder. It's a place where staff can just, let me grab a chocolate, let me have a glance at this prayer, and know that I'm not alone. The pastoral care staff is with me. Also, we take around the hospital these hospitality carts that in some hospitals they call them lavender carts. So instead of having a crash cart, you have these lavender carts that are filled with candy and snacks, bottles of water, maybe printed copies of prayers, all kinds of stuff that staff can choose from. Also, 3 times a day at our hospital, chaplains offer just a brief prayer. 30 seconds of a prayer, maybe a poem, maybe a reading, but just something supportive for both the staff and for patients. And additionally, that our hospital and many others, the chaplains have set up hotlines for any staff member who, and it's 24 hours a day, any staff member who just needs to talk. If they've been through a particularly difficult death or struggle or something, if they're just kind of at the breaking point and they just need to talk, we have set up hotlines. Yeah, so another opportunity for support among chaplains. So chaplains have also become a resource for families who are struggling with their own sense of moral distress, their own sense of helplessness. So if they can't visit their loved ones, what can they do? And so chaplains have been really doubling down on being a resource for families. And so I want to play a little clip with you, for you, that talks a bit about how one chaplain in a hospital is being a resource for patients and families.
It is a trying time for everyone, especially medical workers and the people who unfortunately are in the hospital and can't see their families face to face. Denver 7's Sean Toll spoke to a local hospital chaplain whose role has really changed.
Eric Christensen has been in the hospital for nearly 3 weeks because of recurring complications from a stem cell transplant to treat his leukemia 3 years ago.
Oh my God, it's been awful. It's been horrible.
His wife, Jennifer, and his kids can't see him in person because of all the COVID-19 precautions.
The thing that makes this more difficult is patients being isolated from their family members.
So outside of doctors, the only person he can really speak to is the hospital chaplain.
It's great knowing that he can go in and see Eric.
Michael Guthrie is the hospital chaplain at Presbyterian St. Luke's.
Much of my job function has not changed, still taking care of patients.
But that isolation makes it tougher on patients, physically and emotionally.
It's extremely important because we're able to go where no one else can go.
He's making it a point to visit patients more because of that.
He's got to be making a huge impact on a lot of people right now.
And helping hospital staff with stress resilience, which he says is an important part of this new normal.
I feel like this work is very sacred, and I do feel honored that I've been placed in this time at this hospital to be able to just be a spiritual and emotional support to both our patients, but also to our staff.
What did Eric say the other day? He's like, thank God for Mike. So, yeah, I definitely think that Mike has helped keep him in better spirits.
A friendly face to lift spirits and absolve the anxiety and loneliness. Something needed now more than ever. Sean Toll, Denver 7.
It is a trying time.
So something else that, so chaplains have been kind of leading the charge to find innovative ways of helping patients and families connect. And so certainly there are patients and families can connect by telephone, but probably the most innovative way that has happened is chaplains have been ordering and using iPads and tablets to they go into a room, set up like either a FaceTime or a Zoom call, a Zoom session between the patient and their family members, and so they can see one another. Just yesterday, I was in the room of a woman who she had a trach tube, so she was not able to speak, and her daughter just earlier that morning had dropped off some Mother's Day gifts at the nurse's station and called me and said, "Would you mind going into the room with the iPad so that me and my brothers and sisters and our children and our grandchildren can all see our mom and watch as she opens her gifts." And so I went and did this with the iPad, and it was beautiful. It was incredible to see this woman who was sitting by herself, laying by herself in this room, really not being able to move, and to see her face light up as she was able to interact with her children and grandchildren as they were wishing her a happy Mother's Day and telling her how much that they loved her. It was beautiful. And it's interesting that that this initiative has really come from pastoral care, and this has been a way that chaplains have been kind of leading the charge in that. So that seems to be a way that chaplains can help families connect, and can certainly help patients and families reduce their anxiety. But it's also a way to reduce the anxiety among frontline staff who feel so constrained and terrible that patients can't have any visitors. And to be able to have chaplains walking around with these tablets and to make those connections, to help those connections happen, takes a tremendous load off. And the nurse that I was interacting with yesterday, you could see the relief on her face was palpable. Thank you so much for making this happen. So one little bit off her back, I think, was able to lighten the load of moral distress right there. So this begs the question. At some point, all of this is going to finally come to a conclusion. That this, let's hope, let's pray that at some point that this pandemic will come to its conclusion. That somehow it will eventually change into something much more manageable, and that things will go back, perhaps, to some degree of normal. The thing is that acute moral distress will then become residual, and that so that's going to mean that will certainly change the nature of chaplaincy and the role of chaplains in healthcare. That I think chaplains are going to need to be especially sensitive to issues that come up as a result of residual moral distress, like a sense of lack of meaning, what is the point of all of this? What is the point of struggling as much as I do and working as hard as I do, knowing that people are going to die anyway? Perhaps just this sense of existential uncertainty. What does it all mean? And to be able to be present there. And it may be that chaplains may be called upon to take a much more active role. Oops, excuse me. That's my cat here. Sorry about that. Chaplains may need to just take a much more active role in the life of healthcare staff as they grapple with these symptoms of residual moral distress. That could be holding support groups. It could be offering one-on-one pastoral care, one-on-one consultation. It could be working with employee assistance and employee wellness. We're not sure. We're not sure at this point, but we do know that it's going to happen. We do know that significant ethical questions are going to need to be addressed when this is over, and that chaplains are going to need to be there to be a resource for staff, and that chaplaincy itself is going to need to change, and that we as chaplains are going to need to know how do we change our own role? How do we become agile, and how are we more able to rise to the occasion as these needs change? Because, right now our role pretty much is care for patients first, family second, and staff third. And that may change significantly. So anyway, I just want to throw out, there are just some resources that I took a lot of this information from, just some different articles. And because I'm recording this, this is available for anyone to see. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions or hear any comments that anyone might care to offer in the moment. Especially those of you who have been in healthcare, or who are in healthcare, or who want to go into healthcare, and those who are looking at chaplaincy as a possible calling in the future.
So, John, it's Sally. I'm wondering about any real-time research going on at SLU, or that you know of through your colleagues in pastoral care. I think it's such a interesting time to note what's going to come out of the research as to the impact of this on care providers and on people. I'm just wondering if people have any bandwidth to think about research at this point.
It's going so fast, and things change so quickly, that I think as soon as research is being done, it changes. And that, so I think that it's an ever evolving thing. So some of the articles that I put out there do speak to initiatives that are happening right now in the moment. So one of those articles is about, I think it was written back in the 1990s, just kind of talking about moral distress generally. But the other two actually do talk about what's happening now, and how are chaplains responding to that. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it has changed so quickly. And I know that I have to say that my hat is off to the pastoral care organizations like Association of Professional Chaplains. They have risen to the occasion and said, we are in this with you, and we are trying to figure this out with you. And as we know stuff, we're going to send it to you. And they send stuff out daily. I mean, it's like, thank God, you know. So chaplains feel connected. They feel supported. And in addition to that, you know, 3 times a week, many of these organizations, they hold town halls and roundtables, and just, you know, come and just come and sit, be with us on Zoom, and yeah. So and my organization, ACPE, has done something very, very similar, because unfortunately we've had to cancel units. I had to cancel my summer unit, which was heartbreaking for those who were enrolled in it. And you know, how do we care for each other? How do we care for our programs? How do we care for you know, people who have had to withdraw? And how do we care for our future students? You know, and how do I, as an educator, how do I care for the chaplains, my colleagues? Yeah. So. Yep.
John, I have a question. It's do you see this strengthening the role of chaplains in healthcare facilities, or do you think with some of the loss of revenue and other things that have happened that there'll be pressure on organizations, institutions, hospitals that have chaplains to hold tight on that cost or diminish that cost?
Yeah, so much depends on the relationship between the pastoral care department and the administration. So there are some hospitals who are regarding their pastoral care departments as indispensable. That what's the term? It's not indispensable. It's, well, yeah, whatever. So needed. And there are some hospitals that aren't. There are some hospitals that are saying, well, you know, we've got social workers, so we're going to furlough our chaplains. And some of my colleagues across the country have experienced that. So my sense is that those pastoral care departments who are really able to interface with the administrations of their hospitals, I think that they're going to expand. I think that they're going to explode. And those administrations that are like, well, you know, I mean, what you do, we can have community clergy come in and do, and volunteer their time. Which, you know, I mean, I think that there's many wonderful and skilled community clergy, but they're not chaplains, you know. So, yeah, so I think it really depends. That's kind of what we're seeing. Yeah.
And to go along with that, I would suggest for chaplains, you know, being almost in a decade of hospice care and corporate with Medicare, all of these things. One of the words that come to mind is quantitative. Being able to quantitate, and interpret. So if we are in the business world, being able to translate what it is that we're doing for that business to understand what it is that we do.
Yes, indeed.
So we've been so steeped in it's the narrative, it's the personal relation, but how do we interpret and translate it for others to access what it is that we have to offer to them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. You're sorry that you brought up a wonderful point, that pastoral care departments have to be so proactive, and say, this is why we're indispensable. This is why you need us. Here's the value that we add, and just have to really, really continually put it out there. So, yeah, thank you.
And Sally, I would also want to extend that we are the researchers for right now, right? You know, John was saying that this is moving so fast, and it is. one of the things that came to mind was the most of us probably have engaged. What is it? Nouwen's book, Wounded Healer. Right. So that is a matter of us knowing ourselves, being able to watch and understand what's going on. In the presentation, two words that really stood out was being agile and innovation. So in the midst of us doing all of this research, we have to be on the forefront to create, hey, this is what is needed. This is what we've seen has happened, and this is where we're going, so that we will be able to continue to produce and provide. Because in the midst of it all, we are healing others while wounded. We too have been affected by all of this distress that's going on. So how has it affected us? And if it has affected us, it's kind of like a sermon. Our best sermons are preached to ourselves first, right?
Amen.
And so then if this is true, then use our research to create what will be anew. And I think this is cross fields of ministry. It's for us as chaplains, it's for us as pastors. You know, John said clearly things are going to change. And so if they are changing, it's no guarantee that things will return to what they once were. And if they won't return, then what is it that we are going to create? What is it that the people in the community stand in need of? And what is it that we ourselves stand in need of? So as we continue, if we are a part of the community, then asking ourselves, what is it that we need? Is it that we need someone to journey along with us in this plight of loneliness through this time of distress? And if we are able to find what it is, then pursue that so that we may give it to others.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Mary. I can see that kind of crossover of different settings of ministry in terms of congregations. So congregations are going to be needing to make a case for why that kind of community matters. And perhaps chaplains are in a setting that can also model that kind of research or that kind of articulation of why that community matters. In just the way that you stated it, John, of the parts of the healthcare community that chaplains care for may get turned on their head as far as where the prioritization comes in the future.
Yeah. Well, you know, and it's interesting. It's my belief that that in the years to come, that congregations are going to need to become such an important resource. So certainly, I think that chaplains in the institution itself can offer kind of some short-term, you know, kind of some triage, but really the most meaningful work with residual moral distress is going to be in the congregation, where frontline staff can find a spiritual home of people who are willing to listen and people who are willing to say, yes, we will journey with you in these difficult questions. Oh yeah, most certainly. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
In all of these areas, I wonder if that sixth stage of meaning is going to be the trouble area for both chaplain and congregations, right? So we have the 5 stages of grief, Kubler-Ross, right? I don't know if that was David Kessler or someone else who actually wrote to the family and said, hey, there's a 6th stage, and is it okay for us to add it? And that 6th stage is meaning, right? And so just saying that everything is going to be all right is no longer enough. It does not satisfy the curiosity or need that the individual and the humanity is yearning for and looking for. So how do we begin to create this sense of meaning I think is going to be essential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Just curious, John, about like trainings, CPE trainings moving forward. How does COVID inform further trainings moving forward?
That is that is a darn good question. Well, I'll tell you. So I am starting. So tomorrow, I start supervising a summer resident unit. So residents they are hospital employees. So they are right now. My hospital does not permit students to offer any kind of care, but residents, they're employees, so they can. So so I begin our resident unit tomorrow, and believe me, part of our conversation is going to be about, first of all, how are you doing with all this? And second of all, talking about, we're going to have to, throughout the unit, we're going to have to talk about all of this innovation. We're going to have to talk about meaning. We're going to have to talk about acute and residual moral. I mean, so so this is going to have to become a regular part of ACPE curricula, really. So, so yeah, I mean, I think that ACPE needs to be part of this ongoing changing understanding of pastoral care. And my sense too, I kind of wonder if at some point that there might need to be like a greater partnership between ACP and congregations. And so how can we develop kind of like a common language? How can we inform each other? Because not all CPE students go on to become chaplains. Only about 50% do. The other 50% go on to become congregational ministers or work in some kind of other ministry setting. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Question, I heard you mention resilience, and I know that has been one of the leading words here amongst spiritual care artists. Resilience, what is that looking like now? Is that something that chaplains are still promoting, this sense of resilience? Are we working through it? Are we shying away from the word resilience? How are you dealing with resilience?
Well, I think among the chaplain community itself, I don't know that I hear a lot of resilience. It's more, it's interesting because it's not quite survival and it's not quite resilience. It's something in between. So how do we survive with grace? And I do hear a lot about community. I would say that rather than resilience, the word that I hear most often in chaplain circles of mutual support is community.
Excellent.
That's how we're getting through. That's how we're going to get through. There's one of my colleagues he is the sole chaplain of a hospital in southern Missouri, and he reached out to me and said, "Look, I really need some support. I really just need to talk to someone." And we talked on Zoom. He has reached out to many of my colleagues, and yeah, so now is not the time to tough it out, So
thank you for that.
Sure.
Well, and I appreciate that because coming out of a framework of disaster recovery.
Yeah.
So those terms are also used in those fields. So it's not quite survival, it's not quite resilience. So in that world, we would call those response and recovery phases.
Mm-hmm.
And to imbue response and recovery phases with community is really, really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. So I see that it's just like 1 or 2 minutes after 1 o'clock, and I want to respect people's schedules and time. Is this a good place and time to end?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
John. This has been exceptional and,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
very much
Good.
needed.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
thank
Good.
you. Thank you for the update. It's really good to know what is happening and how best we can be.
Indeed. I want to thank all of you for taking time to be part of this conversation. And I look forward to seeing you all again. So, thank you.
John.
Bless you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.